Now you're very welcome back. So, as some transfer sagas are just kicking into gear, others have come to a chastening and brutal end. Happy to say Miguel Delaney of the London Independent is with us. Hey, Miguel.
How are we?
Very well. We have lots to talk about. Let's start with Harry Kane and his tweet. It was incredible to see the reception from the Spurs fans on Sunday and to read some of the messages of support I've had in the last few weeks. I will be staying at Tottenham this summer and will be 100% focused on helping the team achieve success. We'll get into the nuts and bolts in a second of what went on here behind the scenes. Can we pause for a moment on how terrible Harry Kane's PR is and how, frankly, he needs to look at getting new people here? What is the point of this summer? Like, does Charlie and Harry, do they think this gives them some sort of leverage or a head start on a move with Daniel Levy? Do they think this is like some insert into a contract? It only breeds fan suspicion. I just don't understand what they're at with this summer. Like, it's borderline idiotic.
Yeah, funnily enough, the minute that message came out, an agent actually sent it to me and pointed out those exact two words. What did I mean by this summer? This is like, I mean, talk about any absence of nuance, especially given the situation. I mean, there's a big tangent to this, actually, is that, as someone else pointed out to me today. Now, again, someone with a vested interest, given they're an agent, in that the two English players that maybe most wanted moves this summer other than Grealish are Harry Kane and, to a lesser extent, Declan Rice. Both have family members among their representation, and neither got the moves they wanted, which maybe speaks to something about the market and that. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, tweets like that, it's even if they get a tweet like that right, we all know Kane wanted to go. It's amazing there's often this double speak in football, isn't there? That we almost accept too readily, where as long as someone does the right thing or is seen to do the right thing, kind of can cover all manner of ills, class, dignity, all the rest of it. But there remains this layer of bullshit on top of the game.
No, it's true.
And a tweet like that sums it up.
Well, it was incredible to see the reception from the Spurs fans. Like, this swayed me. I saw them cheer like they've never cheered before. I know, to be fair, I get that the come down and the climb down is always a bit excruciating, whatever excuse you're going to use. But I mean, to go for the fans' reception, which really just blew my mind. I'd never seen fans cheer like this as the kind of impetus for him to stay, again, is painfully disingenuous. So their efforts at PR are just really average. But so you can't explain to me what they gain, because again, I was at a loss as to why they said I will be staying at Tottenham this summer. Why he didn't just say I will be staying at Tottenham. What do they gain with either Daniel Levy or with the fans or with anyone by saying this summer? What do they even mean?
Well, I suppose you could argue maybe that's one of the most honest things in it, that maybe it's fair enough they did this as it's the reality. The Canes will still want to leave. They'll still want to go next summer. It's just even less likely he will go next summer, as he'll be 29. He'll still have 2 years left on his contract, so it's still not a great situation in terms of leverage. But while the potential market remains small, the market for strikers will have gotten much bigger, because whatever about players who develop in the meantime, that will be a market that will definitely have Erling Haaland up for grabs, and possibly Kyllian Mbappe up for grabs.
Yeah.
And a 29-year-old Kane, basically, he's always going to be the third option, especially with that 2-year contract and the price that will bring against the two of potentially the next best players in the world. From start to finish, and the start basically being when they signed that 6-year contract in 2018. This has just been, it's almost been a lesson how not to get a transfer done.
Well, I think Charlie thinks having this summer in the tweet is a clause in the contract now. That's all I can surmise. That's my best guess. So anyway, look, without going overboard on the tweet, distinctly average, but part of this wider botching of this whole scenario. What are you hearing of what went on behind the scenes? It does seem like Daniel Levy did get City very quickly up to maybe 125 million sterling. They weren't prepared to go beyond that. Is that about right?
Well, from my information, and actually, and I feel credit should be given. Well, first of all, credit should be given to Sammy Mockbell of the Daily Mail today, because he did break the story Kane was going to stay. But a former independent colleague of mine, Jack Pitt-Brooke, has been on top of this, and his reporting's been spot on throughout. And for all the talk of City bids, basically the only official bid that we know went in was one. There was a lot of kind of fairly open discussion about, well, we could give you this, or trying to send players Spurs way. But the only official bid that went in was a deal that amounted to 75 million straight, and then 25 million on top of that in in extra deals, which is obviously well short of what Daniel Levy would have wanted. I mean, I think I myself wrote back in May that Levy wanted close to 200 million. And this was City. It's why I think there's always been a fair question about how much City wanted Kane, because it's not like they ever just went out and went, right, here's a serious offer to make you think. It was always kind of like, oh, well, let's maybe if we can make this done on our terms. It was never going to be on their terms. They're trying to sign a club hero on a 6-year contract in a summer where Daniel Levy just absolutely couldn't afford to give any more, or to cede any more ground, given the way the last few months had gone with the Super League and the manager search. So it was just, without a substantial offer from City, it was never going to happen. And there are all sorts of questions why that substantial offer never came in. My hunch would be, and this is some way informed, that they would gladly have taken Kane at the right price, but they didn't want him that much. And some of that actually goes to the way both he and Manchester City play football.
That's interesting, because I was going to maybe pose the question and see what you thought. Like the appeal that Jack Grealish has, notwithstanding, beyond just football, which is important to a football club, all that notwithstanding, you suspect Jack Grealish doesn't settle the league in Manchester City's favour. They could cope without a Jack Grealish type player in their ranks, whereas you would think that Harry Kane, who would most likely score 30 goals in this Manchester City team, pretty much would rubber stamp their claim on the league title this year. So I was wondering if really they had made a mistake. Like, okay, if Daniel Levy's going to do Daniel Levy on this, you say goodbye reluctantly to Jack Grealish for now, and you pay the 160, 170 million for Harry Kane and save yourself 40 million.
Well, you think so. I think you're absolutely right about Grealish. Now, there are fair arguments that Grealish actually won for 3 years' time to be the successor to kind of De Bruyne and all these players. But right now, he doesn't actually give City an extra, I don't think, because they've got an abundance of players like that. He's just kind of more luxury onto the team rather than filling a hole. Now, Kane would have filled a hole, but sometimes, I mean, parts of this summer have almost remind me of previous super dominant teams that have made big signings, and you would think, right, that's that done. They've got everything wrapped up now. But for all manner of reasons, it hasn't worked out. I mean, United won 3 titles in a row in 2001, bought Varane and Van Nistelrooy. Now, Van Nistelrooy ended up being a very good signing for the club, obviously, an exceptional signing for the club, but didn't immediately work out in terms of trophies. And that was more down to the balance of the side with Varane. 2006, Chelsea, after 2 titles they dominated, go and sign Shevchenko and Ballack. Seem no-brainers. Again, just disrupts the chemistry of the team. 2008, United signed Berbatov, disrupts the chemistry of that front three. And even with Barcelona, Pep Guardiola's Barcelona, I think David Villa was obviously the fit in 2009, who they eventually got in 2010. But they went for Zlatan in 2009. And again, on a superficial level, it looked like, okay, this is going to make them just a better side. But it just caused issues. I mean, and again, another one is actually Ronaldo at Juventus, where even though he's been on a very kind of narrow parameter, given they've won 2 league titles with him, a success, he's actually caused problems in the way they play football. They ultimately didn't win a title this year, and their progress in terms of trying to play a different approach has been impeded by having Ronaldo there. And I've gone slightly on tangent there, but the point being that as much of an obvious signing as Kane seemed for Spurs, from what I've been told as well, there were little caveats that maybe suggested that this mightn't necessarily have been as super productive as everyone expected. And especially when you've got someone who plays football as specifically as Pep Guardiola plays football. I mean, 2 of the things that were put to me about midway through the saga, when City still hadn't put in that major bid. One was that Kane basically is, I mean, this is something that's been said for years about him, but he's a striker that really sees himself as a playmaker, number 10. And you can see that in the way, and it's necessary for Spurs, that he drops back links to play, he starts playing those balls over the top for Son and all the rest of it. But if he does that with City, he's suddenly getting in the way of De Bruyne, Grealish, all these players, and also not where Guardiola really wants this number 9 signing to be, which is in the box finishing. Secondary to that, one of Kane's great strengths, and this was something that Clive Allen taught him to do early in his career when he was not so much having difficulties, but to basically make him a more complete player, which is that to always finish very early because it takes the keeper by surprise. And that's gradually become one of Kane's great strengths. But, of course, what Guardiola he doesn't like finishing early. He likes build-up play. And ultimately, not to take out teams through that, but ultimately to cut them open. And, again, how many times have we said it or seen it? That basically classic Guardiola goal where a ball is played across the box or there's a cutback and someone puts it in from 5 yards. So, I mean, now, again, these are relatively minor caveats, but from what I'm led to believe, I think they maybe played a part, as well as Kane's age at 28, into why City didn't ultimately go all in on this signing in the way kind of, they have with previous signings, or you often see when managers decide this is the player I absolutely have to get. City evidently didn't think that Kane was the player they absolutely have to get.
Okay, interesting. Well, he's staying for this summer. Maybe you're right. Maybe there's a degree of honesty about this statement. Although then it's tied in with the reception to the Spurs fans as some kind of, factor in all this. So it's like, do one or the other. Be totally honest. Treat everyone like grown-ups and say, look, you guys know I want to leave, but I love this club as well, and I'm going to stay for another season. But, me and Daniel have a gentleman's agreement, and, well. So that's Kane. What about this Mbappe situation? Kind of exploded really last night all of a sudden, in official terms anyway, a 160 million offer by Real Madrid to PSG, which Leonardo says, we verbally rejected Real. It's far from what we consider to be sufficient value given what we paid for the same player at 18, especially as part of this amount will go to Monaco. I mean, Leonardo's just worried about Monaco here. He thinks it's not fair on them. 160 million wouldn't be sufficient value for an Mbappe if he had 4 or 5 years to go on a contract. When he has one and he's refusing to sign, then 160 million doesn't seem like an insulting amount.
No, it seems like suddenly very good value, especially if it seems, as Leonardo pretty much admitted, he's going. So you may as well get money for him rather than trying to wring the extra year. And I mean, there are all sorts of discussions here we could have about financial fair play and how Paris Saint-Germain should maybe take the benefit of the signing in that regard. But it doesn't seem to be a concern this summer.
I mean, it would be kind of hilarious if PSG showed that little regard for financial fair play that they decided to ride this out with. We'll probably get up to a 180 million offer by the end of the deadline. Surely they have to take it, no? Yeah.
But it's interesting that line that Leonardo put out as well, and it's amazing how transparent he was about this, which I quite like to have to say, because it was something that was said around Spain last night that Florentino Perez basically he's put out specific links because the whole game, it's not to sign Mbappe now, it's basically to secure him for free next summer and show we wanted you so much that we bid this much when you were still under contract, but with little time left. So it's going to be interesting to see what's next in that regard and whether Madrid do go higher. There are all sorts of questions about how Madrid afford this or the logic of this, given what's happened in the last year and given basically the open admissions of how bad their finances were amid the Super League. But then I suppose there's a flip side to that as well, is in that that budget may cost Madrid in terms of their general transfer business. But, and this is key to the whole policy of the club over the last 2 decades, especially under Perez, they're refurbishing the Bernabeu. The costs of that are apparently very, very high. But of course, there's a flip side to that, in that they could have this brand new refurbished stadium, and for the first time in their modern history, no real stars to fill it other than Eden Hazard, kind of slowly jogging around. Whereas you could argue, as much as Madrid are in debt at the moment and for all their financial issues, it actually makes financial sense for a club of that size. And given that Spanish banks will always open credit lines to them for these sort of projects, to get a star in who will fill the stadium, who is Mbappe. I mean, that's the way Madrid have always sold these projects in the past. And you have to say, for a certain level of player, it has worked. And Mbappe is that level of player. And it's what, I mean, I have to say I was very sceptical about the deal last night, but I was talking to people who are working with the Mbappes on this. And they were. I was surprised by how confident they were that this happens this summer.
Wow.
But I mean, again, that could be just all part of the game. But let's wait and see. I mean, for the moment, my inkling will be it will happen. But again, I suppose it's all dependent on how much of a game this is.
Lots of games being played. So that brings us finally to Ronaldo. And the reports are he's engineering a move to Man City. You know, it's just kind of a turn-up, 36 years of age. Like I was reading, he'd spoken to Bernardo Silva and Diaz and Cancelo about this. His contract expires next summer as well. I mean, it really just shows the last year of your contract is a waste of time, really. Don't read too much into that. I mean, on the face of it, I would have said, well, Pep's not going to take 36-year-old Ronaldo. But then, given what you've just said about what he wants from a number 9 and how Kane wants to come back and be a playmaker, I mean, if Pep wants someone who's happy to not do much running and to stand up there and score a load of goals, then, well, maybe Ronaldo makes a bit more sense for a year or two.
But the only thing about that is, I mean, part of Pep's role for a 9 is someone that will harry and chase and be up there in two senses, not just to finish.
I retract it then.
Yeah. Whereas I'm not sure Ronaldo. I mean, and this is almost a great contradiction of Ronaldo's career at this point, in that he's obviously still an amazing athlete, a brilliant player, one of the best of all time, all the rest of it, and yet he doesn't really fit modern ways of playing football, and that's one of the issues Juventus have had. Now, there is, of course, a bigger thing to this, which is the geopolitical dimension. Qatar have just signed Messi, so will Abu Dhabi respond with Ronaldo? Because that is something that has been put to me by people behind the scenes. What it ultimately boils down to is Ronaldo wants to leave, and George Mendes is investigating what's possible. And I think that their preference is obviously for a super club in the Champions League, but they're not going to go to Spain. Barcelona can't afford them. Madrid, it seems, that's off. Paris Saint-Germain, it seems, is off. Although it would be, I mean, one thing that did strike me last night, one thought, would be maybe Mbappe goes to Madrid and you have Ronaldo and Messi together at Paris Saint-Germain. But
I mean, would it be good or utterly dysfunctional?
I don't think I'd ever want a project to fail more. No, for what it represents and everything.
Yeah. But you'd be watching every single week.
It would be quite funny. Yeah. Well, maybe not the league games where they win 7-0. More the Champions League.
And so is Man City a possibility because you're running out of super clubs there?
This does point to kind of, and we've discussed this in the show a lot over the past few years, but this points to the problem football has. I mean, there's more and more money in the game, but most of that money is funneled to the very top end, and it's only created very limited choices for all these players. I mean, if they want to stay competitive and win Champions Leagues and Ballon d'Ors particularly in their final years, like these players, there's only so many clubs that can go to. And it's the same with Conte. Like, it was put to me after some of the reports yesterday that Conte, he doesn't want to go to Arsenal. He wants to go to, his only choices he feels now are Real Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain or Manchester United, depending on what happens next. And it's the same for so many players. And it's quite, I mean, not least given the sheer size of football as the one truly global sport. It's such an avoidable shame that it's only really 10 to 12 clubs that can do anything like this. And especially, I mean, like, we're of a similar age, Joe. But, like, I mean, and of course there is a tendency to always romanticize, what the world was like when you were a teenager. But objectively speaking, it was better, say, in the 90s, where you basically had a much wider field of potentially Champions League winning clubs or competitive clubs, where a club like someone like Dynamo Kiev could have a really exciting team that could win the Champions League, or even that more clubs from Spain or Italy who could potentially be vying for Ronaldo signing now, but it's just impossible now because of the way the game has gone.
Well, I think that's very true, and I actually think it feels like a lesser achievement these days when you win the Champions League. I'm more inclined to shrug the shoulders and say, well, I mean, you should really win it. There's only 4 other teams in it. Whereas, like you said, late 90s in particular, early 2000s, it was a massive thing, and there were so many who could win it. That number has dwindled and continues to dwindle.
Yeah, that's exactly it, yeah. And now, again, COVID has obviously made that worse, but it's kind of exacerbated long-term forces that were already there.
Listen, interesting. So that's where we are with all these mega summer transfers, and obviously the window is closing. Miguel Delaney of the London Independent. I know your phone's hopping today, you're busy, so thanks so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Joe. Thank you.
Cheers. That is Miguel Delaney. This is the football show on Off the Ball. Thanks to Paddy Power for information on responsible gambling. Visit gamblingcare.ie. Coming up next, we're going to talk to Alison Rudd of The Times.